Welcome back, and still from the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and continuing our episode, Nile Cruise episode, live here in Nile TV International. And now we're going to be talking about conservation, Mohammed, in this segment, I think.
Yes, Niveen.
So interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
On October the 3rd, 2017, the Egyptian Museum team packaged the second historic chariot and bed of Tutankhamun and transported them to the Grand Egyptian Museum, located about 2 kilometers from the Giza pyramids. Modern materials and methods in the process of packing and moving the bed were used. They also used precise airlifters that facilitated moving the bed from the base area without exerting any mechanical stress on it. Indeed, such a huge responsibility in this important task.
Right, and we're joined here by Mr. Momin Othman, Director of Conservation Department at the Egyptian Museum. Hello, sir, and thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Sir, would you tell us more about the conservation work? How does it go here at the museum?
As conservation work, I would like first to let you know about what is a conservation, what is restoration.
Yes.
Exactly, from a historical point of view and also from terminological point of view. Historically, the restoration as a practice, it appeared even in ancient times. We have some objects restored in ancient times from pre-dynastic era. Some of these pieces are displayed in the Egyptian Museum, and the other pieces displayed in other museums in Europe and in the United States. This is considered for us as a technician very unique pieces from this point of view. After that, we have some famous person in the history, in the pharaonic history, like Kha-Emwas, son of Ramses II, who restored some of the building and some of the monuments at that time. We have some. We have at Saqqara and Giza, for example. He restored many of the building, many of the pyramids in these two sites. So Kha-Em Wasid considered for us the first restorer in the whole world. It's a very important person. We have a very beautiful statue displayed in front of the restoration department, a very beautiful statue. Other statues in the Louvre Museum, they have more than 3 or 4 statues for the same person. Restoration as a term came from the Latin word restauratio, which means reconstruction or renovation. So this is from the terminological point of view. As a scientist, restoration means any intervention will be done for the historical artifact, a base of analysis and investigation, and a base of ethics, international ethics of cultural heritage for restoration and conservation.
I get the sense, Mr. Othman, that to work in your field, you have to have a bit of a scientist inside you, a bit of an engineer inside you, and a bit of a technician or a laborer inside of you as well, and a bit of and have hand skills as well, and motor skills. So what are the skills in your view that are indeed needed to be a successful restorer?
Actually, to be a very good restorer, you must have many skills. First of all, manual skills. You need to know how to deal with the devices, scientific devices, and other devices for the work. So you need to have these skills. It's very important. for the conservators or restorers. The other thing, it's how to be update your knowledge. In our field, each day we have materials, new materials for conservation, new methods, and a new device. So you have to be updating
With technology.
with technology. It's very important. This is the two things. My opinion, from my opinion, it's to have or to get a very good process, restoration process. You need to have three basic elements. The first, the method. The second, the material. The third, the skills. This is the three basic elements to have a very good restoration process.
Right. Well, sir, how many pieces did your team at the conservation department work on so far?
And as my colleagues mentioned, we have 90,000 of pieces on display and other 70,000 or more in storage. So it's a very hard work. The staff of the conservation department, almost 32 persons. So a huge work in the museum to conserve or restore these pieces. But in general, hundreds of pieces we restore each month, hundreds of pieces.
Yeah. Do you have a statistic, Mr. Othman, for the percentage of successful restorations compared to the percentage of failed one, for instance, or ones that we still are working on?
In our work, we focus on the quality. It's not only quantity. It's focus on quality. Now we have a methodology in our work, in the museum, in the Egyptian Museum, in other big institutions. They have a methodology for working. So in our methodology, we focus on the very good documentation for space, very good, including the investigation and analysis. We have what we call action plan. Action plan for your intervention or your treatment will be done for the bees. So it's very important to have this methodology in your institution.
Okay.
Right. Mr. Osman, how does it feel when you work on a piece or an artifact to preserve it or conserve it for our future generation? How does it feel?
It's a very I don't know how to explain it, but it's a historical moment, because after thousands of years, you are the first person that you deal or you treat this piece. Your fingerprint will be on this piece again after thousands of years. It's a very beautiful feeling. It's a big responsibility at the same time. So historical moment again for the beast. After the discovery of the beast, this is the second historical moment when the restorer will touch it again.
Mr. Othman, how much more difficult does it make it to restore an artifact if it has been wrongly restored before, or incorrectly restored, or not restored to the degree of quality that you wanted? So
this is one of the biggest problem we have in the museum here, because the museum for 100 or more than 100 years, many interventions happened in the past by many restorers and many methodologies here. We have some, as I remember, some famous restorers, foreign restorers, worked here in the museum, Italian and German and French. We can see as well their work in the galleries of the museums. Some of them, they restored it in a very good quality. We can't deny that. Others, no, because at that time there wasn't any international ethics for the restoration and the conservation. But sometimes we find a very critical cases for removing this old restoration. And sometimes we leave it without
intervention.
removing it. But you need to study the piece as well before doing any intervention, before removing these old interventions. But one of the ethics that you need to deal with it, if it's these interventions will damage the piece, you must remove it and replace it with other things.
Right. Well, sir, are there any mistakes that you try to avoid in your work so that the piece of artifact you're restoring doesn't seem or look restored?
And in general, we don't accept what we call mistakes in our work. Yeah. But sometimes it happens. So if you follow your methodology as well, the instructions for handling, for moving, for treating the materials, for conservation the materials, you will not do any kind of mistake. Just follow what you learned and just follow your methodology. You belong. You will not have any kind of mistake.
Mr. Othman, what are the materials that are most used in restoration nowadays? The
Materials for
materials.
conservation?
Yeah, for conservation, yes.
In our methodology, we use natural materials. We still use the natural materials for conservation, and also modern materials for conservation. As I mentioned before, we must be updating related to the materials for conservation. So we deal with the two things: with the modern materials for conservation, and for the natural materials used even in the ancient times.
Does the technique of the work differ depending on the era of the artifact you're working on?
Yes, of course, it's different. It is different, completely different from for the pharaonic period. As a conservators, we deal with the material. We have in the museum a big variety of materials, starting from the stone, for example, metals, wood, papyrus, textiles, glass, and others. So we deal with materials. You need to study the history and the technique used by the ancient Egyptian, or by the Roman, or by the Greek at that time. So you must have a very big information, very big knowledge about the techniques they used and the materials they used in ancient times. Even to avoid any mistakes could be happened during the treatment.
Well,
I can give you an example. On the papyrus, for example, they used the Arabic gum. The Arabic gums to mix it with the colors and with the ink. If you don't know the characterization of the Arabic gum, and you used a water solution of water for the treatment, you will remove all the ink and all the inscription on the papyrus.
Right, Mr. Mo'min Osman, Director of Conservation Department, many thanks for joining us and for your valuable information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
for
sir.
this.
Dear viewers,
Great
please
pleasure.
stay with us because we still have more to go here with Naveen and I from the Egyptian Museum at Cairo's iconic Tahrir Square. Please stay with us.